means I can drink at the same time, which is great. Cool, so I'm going to be talking about attribution, lifetime value, and a bunch of other stuff. Bit of a debate at the front, so we might be able to get that started in a minute. But just when I start, there we go. That's a terrible picture of me. I run a business called Ringside. We're a marketing, analytics, and data business. My speciality is in attribution. I've been doing it for nearly 20 years. Before it was called multi-channel analytics, but we now call it attribution. I'm the CXL course trainer for attribution, and I'm also the Power MBA course trainer for attribution. They're basically the same course, so I only buy one of them because they pay me twice. So you can find out more at my website or the Ringside website. I'm not going to talk about attribution in the context of what we do at Ringside, but there's a lot of examples in here. So, as I said, we're going to cover those two topics. So I'm going to get everyone who can, would you stand up? Yes, here we go. It's been a long evening, everyone's had some wine. Okay, so stay standing if you know what attribution is. Sit down if you don't know what it is. Cool, good start. I think maybe one person sat down. Okay, sit down if you've not done attribution yourself. Stay standing if you've done attribution of some kind.
What do you mean by attribution yourself?
It actually used the model in some way.
Like what, in-house?
No, actually used it, not just clicked on a button to go, oh, that number's smaller. Okay, sit down if you've used Google's and nobody else is. Stay standing if you've done attribution with someone that's not Google. Because Google doesn't know how to.
But it's automated.
360 is, yes, that's Google. That's Google. SA360 is the worst of all of them. Okay, and sit down if it's Facebook. Cool, there's now one's the worst. Awesome. So the people who know attribution are still standing up. And we're going to go through that. Because Google is not attribution. They don't know how to do attribution properly. Oh, I shit on them everywhere I go, including their offices. Okay, so sit down now, guys. Thank you very much. Cool. So we're going to cover what's marketing attribution. I'm going to start at the top. It's very basic. I apologise, but this is what the industry says is marketing attribution. It is crediting activity. That is what it should be. It's not about models. That's what a lot of the conversation tends to be about. It's actually about giving credit to the activity that a marketer is doing, not just PPC. Unfortunately, I'm not a PPCer. I used to do that way back when, but there's been a lot of talk today about PPC. We're going to talk about data right now, so I apologise if that's not what you're into. So, this is actually the way I talk to brands about it. It's about better understanding their customers, because rather than just focusing on the conversion event, the thing that actually the revenue, where the revenue happens for that brand, you need to understand the rest of that activity. So for a brand that converts at 2%, awesome. But the interesting data happens in the 98%. The people who are coming to the website, they're engaging, they're showing you what they're interested in, they're just not ready to convert right now. And we're all consumers. We aren't always ready to convert the moment we start our research with a brand. And so attribution will really help you understand the 98% and not focus just on that 2% who have converted that day. Cool, so in the marketplace, there is this big G. I've already shouted them once, I'm going to shout them again. Because, does anyone know how many attribution models Google has? Because they've got a lot. And they can't decide how to do it. And this is missing some because this is a slide I presented probably 2 years ago, as that reminded me. And they've got 3 or 4 extra ones in GA4. You know, they've got 3 different models in GA4 depending on what page you're on. Awesome, well done Google. And that's nothing about page views. Everyone knows the page views error in GA4. Page views are different depending on what page you're on. Have a look. So if you're not using Google, there are many other options. You can self-build it, you can use companies like Ringside, but let's talk about what you need to do attribution, because it's not as simple as just clicking a drop-down, as you were saying, because Google telling you that this is a data-driven model, you can't trust that. That is the future of what Google Ads is going to be using. but you need to be more savvy. So what data do you need to collect as a brand or an agency to actually understand the performance of your marketing activity? So we categorize this into 4 different areas. So we start at the bottom, because that's logical. Events, right here, the foundational bit. These are things that happen on a website where you can say, this is the customer who's engaging with us in some way. So we classify them as micro and macro, and I'll go through that in a minute. But what we're trying to do here is understand what the customer is doing when they're engaging, because it's not just about that they visited, it's not the channel they came from. We want to understand what that customer is telling us by the things that they're doing when they're engaging with the website. The next level up is where that person has visited. So we want to capture data about the visit, whether that be an app, whether that be the website itself. We want to understand the activity that drove that there. So the campaign, the channel, what device it was, where they were within reason, privacy aside, obviously. And we want to capture all of that. And the other thing that is really important to understand is brands aren't just a website. So it's things like their call center data. So has someone actually come to the website, potentially via PPC ad, and then called the call center? And we want to put that into the model as well. Because the main point of this is we're trying to understand customer and consumer behavior. It's not just about the website visit in isolation. The next level up becomes a little bit more wishy-washy, as everyone knows, cookies and all that stuff that I don't need to explain how cookies work to everyone. That's a different conference talk. But it's things like where we can track a view of activity. This used to be way more prevalent. We used to do a lot with display impressions. Can't do much with that anymore. The next level up is reach. This is where someone potentially has seen the activity. So obviously we're now in the potential, and this is more when we start to talk about media mix modeling or econometrics. Again, different talk, can do 45 minutes on that. I'll try not to cover that today. But the interesting thing with reach is we've started to get a lot more email send data and direct mail data to come in there. So a lot of brands, especially this time of the year, are sending millions of DM every week, and they're sending emails, but open rate on emails is a completely pointless metric. Apologies if there's anyone who's from Klaviyo here who still pushes that. But open rate doesn't work on Apple, so well done for over 60% of your data not working anymore. But you still get the send data. So we can map that send data from a customer ID into a customer journey, and then bear that in mind within an attribution model. So this stuff down here is really easy to get. This stuff is more complicated, but if you think about what you're trying to do here is understand consumer behavior, you can map all of this, you can timestamp most of it, and understand what the customer is doing at any point in their journey. So as I was saying, you've got web analytics. You can then link that to your marketing tech platforms. This isn't aligning the data. You can actually do click level analytics and link everything from Google Ads into an individual click that arrives on your website. You can do the same in Bing. You can do the same in Facebook if you partner with them hard enough. Then you can go and get all of your satellite data, so your CRM data, your DM data, the stuff that goes around the company. All of that data, and you link that using customer identifiers, so customer IDs. Again, no PII at any point of this, because we don't want the privacy guys to come hard on us. And then we've got all of that going into a database so you can actually start to understand that data. So we've collected all of that together. What that enables us to do is create that customer journey. And what's really important is it's not just that there were 5 visits, or there were 3 visits with one of them being PPC. What that customer is telling us is the engagements that happen within the visit. That's the key thing, and that's where the micro conversions are really important, because the person coming to the website, adding something to a basket, or viewing multiple product pages, we really need to understand that. So you can answer the questions that are similar to, like, how many products does someone view, and then they have a less likelihood to convert. Because for some brands, that's 3. For some brands, that's 12, because someone does a lot of research. It's very different for different types of customers, and it's also different depending on how much awareness they have of the brand, what product category they came in on, and there's many other dimensions that you want to overlay on top of that. So, I'm going to go right back to basics. This next slide, I think I had about 20 years ago in a deck. This is a first click model. Anyone who doesn't understand this, Cool, I don't have to explain that. Awesome. Pointless. Is used to sell display networks. Google's. Pointless. Used to sell PPC. The only way you could do it and should be doing attribution is machine learned. But you need to understand what is in the machine learning model. And this is the issue, is that so many of these models are completely black boxed. They don't explain what goes in, and therefore the inherent trust that you build to say, yeah, that's going to be the conversion, that's the value I'm going to give to that last interaction. That's amazing. So does everyone know that the DDA model uses only 400 touch points? Sounds a lot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's data points. Yeah. Someone sounds Prosecco. It's all right, she was the one who spilled it earlier. But that's 400 data points, so that's not 400 visits. That's 400 events, page views, all of the interactions over the full journey. I've seen that in a singular visit for clients. So that DDA model is only looking at the last 400 before the conversion. Now, that was in a presentation that a friend of mine who's very senior at Google accidentally sent me back on WhatsApp. But that is exactly how DDA works, and I think it's come out now. There's people nodding that know that. But that's how DDA works. So can we trust DDA to show us actually what's going on? And also, DDA only takes into consideration the data you put in it. So it's not going to take into consideration how you're ranking in search, what your email performance is like. It's definitely not including Facebook's data. So how can you understand the value that DDA is, even in SA360, where a lot of brands don't even put email, direct, affiliates into SA360, they only use PPC. Now, what I will say is DDA and those types of models that Google have are very good at attribution with what they've got in their architecture that's sitting there. So they're very good at showing you the value of generic search compared to brand in the paid ad space. But they're not going to tell you how much SEO is overvaluing, or it's undervalued, and therefore you need to overvalue its value. With email, it's typically a really undervalued channel. But that's not going to be in a lot of the SA360 stuff unless you add it in, which is totally possible, I'm sure. Well, I know it is, but you need to have a broader understanding of what is in DDA to understand the value it brings to the organisation. Main takeaway. If there's one takeaway from my entire deck today, it's make sure you understand micro events. These are the things that you can easily track no matter what your analytics platform is. You can set them up as goals or events or something. Set up more than you have at the moment. I don't care how many you've got, set up more. You need to understand what is going on the website and those interactions that happen within pages. It's about classifying those interactions, and even if you understand the minute elements of what goes on within that customer journey, it will give you a clearer understanding of that 98%. And that's the most important bit. That 98%, they're telling you what they're not getting that's getting them to convert. Because so many people are going to be doing that research. Cool. Talk a little bit about PPC. We do profit as well, which is an interesting one. But let's talk about ROAS, because that's the universal query here. One of the big things that attribution helps from a PPC perspective is the difference between what you see from a last click and what you have from an attributed space. We see a lot of generic campaigns have a negative or very low return on ad spend, and yet in the attribution space, a lot of those generic or DSA terms or campaigns are massively undervalued to the point where you actually would have profitability if you understood that that was contributing to conversions that happened elsewhere. Now, a lot of the time, those contributions still happen within PPC. We see a lot of trends of people coming back via multiple different search terms in different campaigns. They become more brand aware, which is a very common journey, that you have a generic PPC term and then that person 2 days later comes back via brand PPC. But we know what the value of each one of those interactions within that journey is. We know that the first visit where they came on a generic term, they did a lot of product research. So they told us that that's what they were doing on that visit, and then their follow-up visit, they just converted. They didn't actually do anything else. They came to the website, they already had the product in their basket, and then they converted. So the attribution model is trying to understand that, and it's giving a lot less credit to the brand PPC that in a last click model is getting 100%. But that generic is going to get a lot more value, not because it's a two-touch journey, because that's how Google does a lot of them. It's not just it's a two-touch journey, it's the customer did the things that matter in the first visit, and their second visit was just the conversion. We see this a lot in affiliates. Affiliates is the last touch, it's the voucher code. It's the, I've come to the website 5 times, I'm not ready to purchase yet. Oh, I'm actually ready to purchase, I just need 20% off. So I go to Voucher or Quidco or whatever it is, I get my discount code, I come back. An affiliate goes, yeah, I'm going to have 100% of that. You can pay a commission, but I'm going to have 100% of that revenue. But that's not what the attribution model saying. It's saying, well, actually, we're only going to give you 5% because the customer's ready to buy at that point. We can do a lot of automated bid adjustments through this, but I'm not going to speak about that too much because that will get me rambling. I want to talk about lifetime value and stuff. PPC conference, I'm going to talk about SEO. Awesome. So, what we see generally is SEO is undervalued by 19%. That comes from brand PPC, that comes from direct, and it comes from email. The movement of value happens majoritively through direct and PPC. So if you have your Google Analytics set up and you say, okay, yeah, this is how much revenue is coming from SEO, actually that's massively undervalued. There's way more revenue that's actually brought to the website through SEO. The number you have for brand PPC is way too high. It's a lot lower. But everyone knows that. But if you can show the brand, actually, we're always going to be buying 100% impression share in brand. Cool. Well, actually, where should we be moving our money outside of that? Is it in other campaigns in paid search? Probably. Where? We can work that out through to a ROAS or through a POAS. But then you can go, actually, well, let's invest a little bit more in SEO. Let's invest a little bit more in email for existing customers. There's many different ways you can cut that pie. Going to talk about CRM at a PPC conference.
Wait.
Prosecco. One thing so many brands miss out on is having an idea of what is a new versus returning customer. It is so broken. This is not a new versus returning user. Very different thing. That often doesn't work. If you've got server-side tracking set up correctly and you've got the best GA set up, cool. But we're talking about that brand. Is that a new customer for that company? And most people haven't had GA for 20 years, 15 years. So what could you do? Well, you can load all of your historic CRM data. They've got that data set somewhere in the business. This is an existing customer. We know what the customer IDs are. We know when that conversion happens today what that customer ID is. So if this is the 20th purchase for that individual, we have that data somewhere. Why don't we use that in our understanding of performance? That data is available to most businesses. Yes, it's a spreadsheet or a database, so you need to be a little bit more au fait from a data perspective. But all that allows us to go is, yeah, we've seen 2 conversions for this customer ID, but we've got 6 conversions historically. So this is not a new customer. This isn't their second conversion. We know what their overall revenue is over the lifetime of that customer. So we need to better understand what is going on there, which turns into understanding the customer. So cost per conversion or cost per order, there's different terminologies here, or cost per sale, are all the same metric basically. It depends on what company you work with. And then you have CAC, which I love saying like that, because it is basically CAC most of the time. People use all of these interchangeably. Has everyone found that, right? They'll talk about CAC, but they actually mean cost per conversion. Because CAC should be, in my opinion, which is not necessarily what you find if you go to Wikipedia, this should be the first conversion for a customer. How much are we spending to acquire a customer? That's what CAC should be. It's the cost to acquire a customer. It shouldn't be cost to acquire a conversion. So how much are we spending to acquire the first time for that customer? And then you start talking about what is our CPA for new customers, which is the same number, and then what is our CPA for the second conversion, third conversion, fourth. They're very different questions. Then you have people who, these are really complicated slides, I'm really sorry. There's no easier way of explaining this. But then you have what is the cost against revenue, and therefore working out what your ROAS or ROI is across the board. And dependent on when you ask the question and what data set you use, the answer to the question changes. And this makes it incredibly complicated to talk to anyone in a business and say, here is the cost per acquisition, here is the CPS, CPA, CPO. So typically, and hopefully everyone is on the same opinion as me, to calculate any of these CP somethings, you do cost of the visits in that period divided by the cost of the sales in that period. So you have the cost of, the count of the sales. How much cost divided by count of sales? Cool, that's cool. But then if you change the time period that you're looking at a different grouping of visits. Some that have converted, some that have visited in the past, and they have got some crossover. So this person here has converted twice in that period, but we also know that they visited before that. That cost isn't taken into consideration when we look at this data set. Then you go, that's okay, that's complicated. What about if we look at that one person? So that one person's cost, well, we know what that number is, and we can do the maths for that person, but actually, is that the right number to use? Because the CPA for the first conversion, surely the CPA is all of that, but is the CPA for the second conversion all of it, or is it just between the two visits? And all of those conversations, yeah, exactly. All of these conversations is, what is the expectation? If you tell someone this is our average cost per acquisition, what's their expectation you're going to give them? What's the number that they think? Which of these equations, maths, are they expecting you to give the answer to? Because none of them are the right answer, whilst they're all the right answer. Depends on what expectation they have. This is my opinion of what CAC should be. Is all of the visits before the first conversion for that person. This is how much you've spent to acquire a customer. And then you average that for everyone who has become a customer, or everyone who has not yet become a customer. So the second person here, all of this cost would be included because they're not a customer yet. So this is how much you've spent to acquire people. People are nodding, which is great, because that means that what I talk about is right. But that is not necessarily what people talk about when they say CAC. One other thing to talk about here is what happens after that conversion. So we've got a few other metrics here, acronyms, yay, that I made up, even better. Yes. You've got customer cost to date. From a terminology, this is the amount of cost we've spent to acquire that person so far. This is how much money we've spent. And that rolls on. And if you think about looking at someone in a single customer view, this is the amount of cost we've spent to acquire them. Here are all their visits. Here are all their micro conversions. Here is their total revenue to date. So it's customer revenue to date. This is the total revenue we've generated. So you can start to see this is the total cost that we're spending, and this is how much money we've made for this individual. They're very different metrics if you try to aggregate that over everyone, and that's the difference here. And the last thing is future customer value. So this is where you start to predict, based on the data you have for cost to date and revenue to date, is you take that revenue and you take that cost and understand the future customer value, which is very different to lifetime value. And I apologise, I'm not shitting on your lifetime value comments, but most people do lifetime value wrong. I'm going to tell you the way I do it. I think everyone else does it wrong, including Avinash, who I told, but I was very drunk when I told him, because Avinash uses a time frame of 2 years to extend his lifetime value. So most people, and this is what the industry says is how you do lifetime value, and most people will do this. And as much as I say this is wrong, if this is what you're doing, this is the industry way of doing it. This is the way that most people can do it, because it's reasonably easy to outcome a number that everyone's happy with in the organisation. And if you have to give someone a number and they give you 20 minutes to tell you what your lifetime value is, use this, because this is the way that you need to do it. Because this is your lifetime value is AOV times by conversion frequency. So how many times in an average year does someone buy something? Times by lifespan. Avinash uses 2 years for lifespan. That's the blanket he uses for e-commerce, and you can read all his blog posts about it, and I totally understand why he's done that, because what is the answer to that question? How long is someone going to buy with you? You work with a brand who launched last week. They've got a bunch of VC funding, they've got a great product, they've got people buying for their first time today. What's their conversion frequency? Well, it's 1 at the moment. Are they going to buy again this year?
What's the product?
Exactly. Yeah. So the CEO will go, yeah, they're going to buy on average 1.5. You're like, cool, let's plug that in. How long are they going to buy for? I ain't got a fucking clue. What can you do? Well, why don't you load all that historic data I was telling you about from CRM and get what that understanding of that historic data is? How many times does someone buy with you? But more importantly, what is the average order value? When you do average order value, who here uses mean, as in average? Oh, come on, that's everyone.
Don't be shy.
Who uses median? Cool. Who uses jackknife sampling?
What?
Yeah. Yes. One person went, I know what that is.
I've seen this presentation.
I know you have. Jackknife sampling is basically where you remove outliers from the top and the bottom of your data. So you can remove the top 10%, the bottom 10%, and then use a mean or median average on the remaining data that you have. Now what that really helps with AOV is if you've got someone who orders a 25 grand order and someone who buys a 19p order, but most of your data is in the 300 range, you'd end up with something that's actually a higher revenue than you ever have sold. So we had a client where they sold a bunch of sofas for like 25 grand. Most of their conversions were 300, but their AOV was 500. But they've never had a conversion that went through at 500. It was all only 300 and then skipped to 25 grand, which is firstly ridiculous for a sofa, but that's a completely different question. So if you understand what the AOV is, what you also need to do is understand when that AOV happened. Customers who have legacy value with you, so they've converted 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, will spend more. As a universal statement, it's not necessarily true, I've got examples where it's not, but that is what should be happening. Because that customer has a higher brand value, they're more likely to repurchase, and therefore you should see a chart like this, where AOV goes up over time based on when they purchased. So in the 10th year of purchasing, you have a very high AOV comparative to their first year. Also, conversion frequency goes up. So how often someone purchases an average year will increase. They have higher brand value, they're more likely to purchase in future years. Cool. Lifespan should be, in my opinion, the opposite of your retention rate. So if you calculate what your annual retention rate is, you can then plot a curve on a log chart. Apologies for anyone who doesn't understand log charts, but on the log chart, what that looks like. So their first year retention will be 100% because they bought that year. Obviously, it's going to be 100%. Their second year, the retention rate for that person in this data set is about 14%, I think. So the 14% of the people who purchased in the first year have come back on the second year. Then you see a curve and you've got a trained model that understands what the curve looks like, so it can predict past the data you have. So we've got clients with 2 or 3 years data and it predicts 6 years because the curve is showing that people have a retention rate over the lifespan that we've seen so far, and therefore we can track what that looks like over their the future lifespan. So when you times all of that together, so you work out what the AOV is for every year, you work out what the lifespan is, and you know what that retention rate is for those people, so you know the conversion frequency. Total all of that up, you get customer lifetime revenue, not lifetime value. Because lifetime value, the word value, means, well, we've probably had to pay some money for that. So we can predict how much we're spending to reacquire that customer as well. So we can follow exactly the same process to say how much should we be spending to reacquire those customers over their lifetime, and then take that from that. So we have customer lifetime revenue, we have customer lifetime cost, revenue minus cost, value, and therefore you've got a cleaner way to understand lifetime value. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Russell. Does anyone have any questions? We'll take a few. Sorry, I will say we'll take just 2 because we're running late. Pizza's here. There's competition winners to announce, so we definitely don't want to take too much of this time. So yeah, first question.
I think for us, it's very difficult to persuade clients that data-driven attribution is what they should be listening to. So I was wondering if you had any advice on like how to persuade them how important it is.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It is incredibly difficult because most people are very happy in the last click land because that's what they show to the business. I think one of the first questions that you need to answer is there actually a difference between the first touch and last touch? As much as I call out first touch to be useless, the only use it has in to say, is there a difference between the original touch point that we see that customer with and the last touch point? If there's no difference, which sometimes happens, short journeys for products with very low revenue.
So for when there's a big difference, because most of the time I see a big difference, what do you recommend for that? What do you think why is there a discrepancy?
It's starting to have the conversation to explain to them about what happened before that. So explain to them what's in that 98%, because their mindset is 100%. Sorry, I shouldn't use 100%. Their mindset is fully in that 2%. What's working to convert people? And you see this a lot because there's a lot of PPC people in the room, but this is what SEOs have struggled with their entire career, is that they don't get the credit for a lot of their work. And PPC generally get credit for their work. Over credit for most of it. Guys, I used to sell brand
PPC of your PPC.
I don't have a microphone.
Yeah, you do choose to get one.
It's fine. I used to sell brand PPC. You did nothing and got paid everything. So it used to be a lot easier. But I think this is the conversation to have, is to say, okay, did you know about this? These campaigns, your generic campaigns. This is what that user is doing within that visit. When you have those micro conversions, you can show them. Even if you look, and I'm not going to push GA, but their customer view, you can go, did you see this customer? This customer did everything on that generic PPC visit, and then your brand PPC picked that up. We need to go more after those customers. And especially when you're talking about, and it was mentioned earlier, about splitting your budgets between performance and awareness. Like understanding what the return on investment is in an attributed space for your awareness campaigns is exactly where people need to be looking at, because there is a point with a lot of businesses where they hit a point where they have very little adjustments they can make to drive growth within a last click campaign. Because they don't realise that there is so much in the middle and top of funnel that they're not going after at the moment because it doesn't have their 400% ROAS.
Yeah, but hard to attribute, right?
It's hard to attribute if you don't run the models to start with. The good news is most people have some form of model available by Google to start that conversation. Whether you trust it or not is up to you guys. But there is a lot of stuff in there that starts the conversation that you can then take further.
Thank you.
Of course, you meant lifetime profit.
No, because I didn't talk about GP, which is.
But that's what it really should be. The lifetime value is the profit in the end, and its retention costs as well. I've got a question, and that is, how do you deal with sparse data? I mean, most merchants will have sparse data. I mean, the example is Tesco's no problem to do that modeling because you've got loads of repeat customers, and they can calculate very exactly. But how about a customer who's got maybe one every 2 years?
What do you mean, one every 2 years?
One conversion, repeat conversion every 2 years.
Oh, good luck. So, let's take a car company as an example, because that's not even 2 years. So you typically wouldn't get a repeat customer. So what the conversation there is more about what is the actual cost to acquire that customer in the first place over a much longer journey. So high revenue, low frequency purchases what you tend to also look at is what is the cost to acquire next customer, which is a completely different conversation, which isn't in this slide deck. But that's where you talk about brand awareness and brand profitability. Then you go to product awareness and how much that customer is likely to recommend another customer. Because a lot of that you can do through MGM programs, you can do that by tracking referral links and understand where the crossover between next best customer is, instead of what we do a lot, which is next best product, which is a different question on here. So next best product is way more common for repeat purchases. So someone bought a jacket, are they likely to buy a hat or gloves? And vice versa. And then next best customer is where you talk about what is the likelihood of that person recommending you, which is talking about satisfaction, loyalty and retention programs that happen after the conversion. So we do that with car companies.
Reviews.
Yes, exactly. Pizza time?
Pizza. Almost pizza
Sorry.
time. No, you can sit down. Thank you very much, Russell.